Hey, what's up guys? Hardleg Joe here with the deck profile for the Krawler Grind deck. I'm just going to go through everything in here, and then I'll explain how it works. So for monsters, we're playing all Crawlers. We've got 3 Dendrite, 2 Ranveer, 3 Receptor, 3 Glial, 3 Axon, and 3 Spine. For spells, we're playing 3 Pot of Desires, 3 Wormbait, 3 Twin Twisters, 2 Scapegoat, and 3 World Legacy in Shadow. Our traps, 3 Storming Mirror Force, 3 Metaverse, and 3 World Legacy Pawns. Our extra deck consists of 1 Sky Cavalry, 1 Gaia Saber, 1 Borolo Dragon, 1 Decode Talker, Trigate Wizard, 2 X-Crawler Quarrelink, 2 X-Crawler Niragos, 2 X-Crawler Synapses, 2 Mrs. Radiant, 1 Proxy Dragon, and 1 Link Spider. The side deck I'll go over in a little bit. So this is a pretty pure Crawler deck, and the Crawlers, if you're unfamiliar with them, they're all flip effect monsters, and they all share one effect in common. That's if this face-up card in its owner's control leaves the field because an opponent's card effect, you could special summon 2 Crawlers with different names from your deck in face-down defense position. This shared effect rarely comes into play because most of the time you're setting these monsters face down. They're flip effect monsters. So if your opponent Raigekis or banishes them while they're face down, you're not going to be able to summon the 2 from the deck. But if you flip them face up and they get negated and destroyed by something like Solemn Strike or like Crystal Wing Synchro Dragon, because they're face up when they're destroyed, then you can search 2 of them. So it's pretty nice. It stops them from negating your flip effects, essentially. It can also be pretty good with our Soul Trap. I'll cover this in detail later, but basically during your opponent's turn, you can flip a monster face up. So if they do Raigeki, you can chain this, flip them face up, and then when Raigeki destroys the face-up monster, you'll get to summon 2 out of your deck. Mostly you're just using these monsters for their flip effect. Spine is probably the most useful because it targets a monster on the field and destroys it. Axon's the second most. It destroys a spell trap on the field. Glial's also pretty good because it can special summon a Crawler from your hand or your graveyard in either attack position or face-down defense position. So if it's on your turn, you can flip it up to add more monsters to the field for link summons, and if it's during your opponent's turn, then you can set another monster and hopefully stall out a little bit. Receptor, flip, add a Crawler from your deck to your hand, so a little bit of search power. Ranveers target up to 2 Crawlers in your graveyard, add them to your hand. Normally you actually want Crawlers in the graveyard. This is only really useful if you're in a really long grind game and most of your cards are in the graveyard. That's why we're only playing it at 2. It's mostly a recovery card. You just want to play as many Crawlers as you can, basically, to set up for some of your other cards. And then Dendrite is just send 1 monster from your deck to the graveyard. So it should be pretty obvious how these effects can help you generate advantage. These 2 destroy cards your opponent controls, this one lets you add 1. The rest of them basically set up for your link plays. Your link monsters, again, they all have special effects of their own, but they share one common effect, and that's if this face-up card is destroyed by battle, or leaves the field because of your opponent's card effect, you could target 2 Crawlers with different names in your graveyard and special summon them in face-down defense position. This shared effect really brings the grind portion of the deck to life. Most of these are high enough attack that your opponent's going to have to use a resource or 2 to get rid of them, and when they do, you're just summoning 2 Crawlers back. And then, of course, you're using these effects again. You can continue to destroy more monsters. And if they don't get rid of these, then you just make another link. So this becomes a really difficult deck to get rid of. And if you can keep it going for long enough, you can really out-resource your opponent after 5 or 6 turns. Now, the only other key cards we have in here are our Field Spell and our Trap. The Trap is continuous. It has 2 effects. You can only use 1 per turn, but you can use it during either player's turn because it's a trap. You can either target 1 face-down monster you control and change it to face-up attack or defense position, or you could target 1 Crawler in your graveyard, shuffle it into your deck, and then target a face-up monster you control and change it to face-down defense position. So that first effect, obviously just really good. You can actually use Spine to disrupt your opponent or Axon by flipping them up and destroying things without your opponent having to attack into them. You can also use this to chain to opponent's effects, either things that target this or stuff like Dark Hole Raigeki. Flip it face up, and then when it's removed from the field, you get to summon 2 other Crawlers from your deck. So very useful card. And of course, if it gets into a real grind match where you've got a whole bunch of cards in the graveyard, you can start shuffling them into the deck in order to flip these face down and then use their effects again. The Field Spell, meanwhile, has several effects. First, all Crawlers gain 300 attack and defense. Pretty good because most of these are fairly low on attack. Secondly, once per turn, you can special summon 1 level 2 or lower insect monster from your hand in either face up or face down defense position. This can really help you swarm either face down if you're just hoping to use your flip effects, or you can summon them face up and then you have a lot of material for your link summons. Third effect, when a flip monster you control is destroyed by battle with an opponent's monster, you can send that opponent's monster to the graveyard. This is great because it's non-targeting, non-destruction removal. It sends to the graveyard. It's not once per turn, so if you've got a field full of these and they want to try to battle over all of them, they're going to have a bad time. And of course, it works as spot removal. If your opponent has a Beals or something like that, you can attack into it with one of these monsters. Granted, most of them have pretty low attack, but it's worth it to take the hit, usually to remove something like that from the field. And then to play with that effect, I'm actually playing Metaverse instead of Terraforming. Also just to switch things up, because I play Terraforming in just about everything. But there's a trap card. Take one field spell from your deck, either activate it or add it to your hand. This can be pretty good. You have a Krawler set, your opponent attacks it, you activate Metaverse, and activate your field spell directly from the deck. They can't go back and redo that attack. They have to attack into the Krawler. And then when they destroy it, your field spell activates and sends them to the graveyard, which can be a pretty nasty surprise. It's also pretty good just for wasting resources in general. If you're going for speed, Terraforming would be better, but this can actually be pretty neat because you'll set it, then your opponent might waste their Twin Twisters or their MST on it, and you can just chain it to activate the field spell. Now probably the only non-generic card we have left in here is Wormbait. Pretty nice little tech, really old card that's useful now. Activate it if you control face-up insect monster, special summon 2 worm tokens that are insect, earth, level 1 to your side of the field. But you cannot normal summon or special summon level 3 or 4 monsters the turn you activate this. Now if you don't know, all the Kralwers are level 2 earth insect monsters, so that restriction isn't really all too difficult for them, and that actually helps you go into your links. One of the 3, it's 2 Krawler monsters, so you can only use the Krawlers, but the other 2 are 2 insect monsters and 2 earth monsters, so you can just as easily use these tokens to make them. Likewise, because everything in the deck is earth, Mrs. Radiant is pretty good, gives another attack boost, and can help recur some cards from the graveyard, especially if all your Krawlers are already in the graveyard. Likewise, we also have Scapegoat, kind of similar, but a little bit more niche, that's why we're only playing it 2. Summon 4 sheep tokens, they can't be tributed. You cannot special summon monsters the turn you activate this card, but you can set them. So if you really need to, you can activate this and then still set a Krawler on your turn. Most likely, though, you're going to set this. If you really need to stall, you can activate it during the battle phase and summon 4 monsters that your opponent has to get rid of. More than likely, though, you're going to wait until the end phase, activate this, and then you'll have 4 tokens during your turn. And then you can make like a Mrs. Radiant and an X-Krawler Synapsis. Or if you really want to, you can use them to make like Proxy Dragon and Link Spider, and through some shenanigans get something out like Varolord Dragon. That's 3 effect monsters, so you can't use the tokens to make them, but you can use the tokens to make these monsters, which are effect monsters, and then use them as stepping stones into Varolord Dragon, which is actually a pretty decent boss monster in this format. Neither player can target it with monster effects. During either player's turn, you can target a monster and it loses 500 attack and defense permanently, and if it attacks a monster, you can take control of it, put it in one of the zones that this card points to, until the end phase of the next turn, at which point it's just sent to the graveyard. We've also got a couple other generic links. Gaia Saber's just a beat stick. Decode Talker, of course, just a staple at the moment. Trigate Wizard can be pretty good. It gets effects equal to the number of monsters co-linked with it. This deck can actually swarm pretty good once you get started, because you could summon 2 monsters at once. This will summon a monster out. You get all the tokens. So if you get a really, really good hand, you can actually make Trigate Wizard with 3 things linked to it, at which point it's nigh unstoppable. But that's not the point of the deck, it's just something I kind of teched in here. Really, you can kind of play whatever you want. You can also put rank 2s in here because you've got a lot of level 2 monsters, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend it. And that just leaves us with our generic tech cards. We're playing Storming Mirror Force because it returns all the monsters to the hand. This can be pretty good for protecting your Krawlers from battle so that you can use them next turn to make a Link Summon. It can also be pretty good against a lot of these decks that swarm out of the extra deck. Pendulum Magicians, if they don't have their trap, this can actually be pretty effective against them because it doesn't destroy and it doesn't target. Same thing, it's just sort of an out to Decode Talker, Varolord, and a lot of these other monsters that can't be targeted or destroyed. Twin Twisters are spell trap removal, yet again, just because you kind of want Krawlers in the graveyard. You need to have at least 2 of them in the graveyard to activate any of these effects. They only float into monsters into the graveyard. So sometimes if you use Wormbait or Scapegoats to summon these, you won't have 2 Krawlers in the graveyard, especially in the first couple turns. So this can be good for helping to set that up. And finally, we're just playing Pot of Desires. Banish 10 cards, draw 2. Just pretty good because this deck needs as much draw power as it can get. It's a pretty slow deck. And because everything is sort of reliant on the extra deck, you don't really need any of these in particular. it doesn't matter what you banish. The only things you don't want to banish 3 of is like your field spell, and even then you can kind of work without it. One important thing while I'm on this field spell, I forgot to mention that the X-Crawler monsters, which are all the Link monsters, they don't count as crawlers, so if your opponent attacks into these, you can't send them to the graveyard. Just something to know. And while I'm talking about the crawlers, I guess I should mention their other effects. Synapsis says that crawler monsters this card points to cannot be destroyed by battle, gain 300 attack and defense, and can make up to 2 attacks on monsters during each battle phase. And Narogos says that crawler monsters this card points to can't be destroyed by battle, gain 300 attack and defense, and if they battle an opponent's monster, any battle damage they inflict is doubled. None of these effects are really all that useful except for maybe the battle destruction effect, but most of the time they're going to attack into these before they attack into the monsters they're pointing to. They're mostly just here because them combined with the last X-Crawler and the field spell, they can be pretty decent beat sticks. This has the highest attack with 1300, which granted if you get all of these on the field, this can be a pretty decent beat stick as well. But most of the time you're just out-resourcing your opponent and then attacking them for 1900. The final Link monster has sort of a stacking effect. It gains effect equal to the number of face-up crawlers on the field. If you have 2 or more, all monsters you control gain 300 attack and defense, which just boosts up the beat sticks a little bit more. At 4 or more, your opponent can't activate cards or effects during the battle phase. And at 6, your opponent's monsters can attack directly. I've never been able to get 6. Usually you've already won by then. I wouldn't really worry about it. Mostly it's just good for the 300 attack boost. If you can get any other crawler on the field, then it'll go up to 2300. 26 if you've got the field spell. As for the side deck, the only things I would mention, Cosmic Cyclone, I would side this again in just about everything at the moment because Pendulum Magicians and Spirals both suffer greatly to this, especially if you can have extra in addition to your Twin Twister. And I also tried Struggling Battle with this to help generate card advantage, but it didn't end up working that well. Good card in general overall, though. Same thing with Broken Line, formerly Shut Line. Just pretty good card in general. All of these could be teched in instead of Storming Mirror Force, or instead of the Pot of Desires if you don't want to get any of those. And then finally we've got some things that actually have some synergy. We've got Supply Squad. Every time a monster is destroyed by battle or card effect, draw a card, and you're destroying monsters a lot. We've got the Subterror Link monster, which is pretty good, but it's actually broken. I had it in here, but it's not working on YGOPro 2. That's the only reason it's not here. We've also got this Subterror Link monster, which is actually really good for the deck. It's any 2 flip monsters. It's got 2000 attack. During your main phase, you could send a flip monster from your deck to the graveyard to special summon a monster from your hand face down, but it's broken on YGOPro 2 right now. It's not working, so I couldn't include it. Maneater Bug actually works pretty good with this. Might be good to replace with Ravener if you're not going into really strong grind games, or if they just have a lot of monsters they're swarming with. It fits in perfectly because it's a level 2 flip monster insect earth, so it can be used to summon any of the links except for the crawler ones. The field spell lets you summon an insect face down, so it works pretty nice. Likewise, as Tekapede is an insect monster, it's earth. You could special summon it by banishing an insect monster from your graveyard. It's got 1900 attack. Pretty good beat stick, pretty good for making some of these link monsters. I just really didn't want to banish stuff from my graveyard. And finally, World Legacy World Armor. This is actually a pretty great card. Seems like it's almost specifically made for the crawlers. When a monster is flip summoned, you can special summon this from your hand. If it's normal or special summoned, you can add 1 World Legacy card from your deck to your hand. The main thing is just anytime you flip summon a monster, if one of these happens to survive your opponent's turn, not only can you summon a 2500 beater from your hand, but it's going to let you search out either your field spell or your trap, which are both World Legacy cards. The only problem is it's a level 7, so it can be very bricky, and it only works on a flip summon. So unless you're going to be able to survive into your opponent's next turn, this is going to be dead in your hand. You're not going to be able to do anything with it. If you wanted to go for an even slower, grindier deck that had more Mirror Forces in it, less Pot of Desires, less of these tokens, this could be a really good card, but you've really got to stall your opponent out to make it worthwhile. So there you go, Krawler Grind. Probably not a great deck, not even a good deck, really. Crawlers themselves are really a bit too slow, even with as much as they tried to speed them up. But they're a nice little Link deck. If you wanted something that's a little more Link-heavy than Goki's, but not super Link spam like the World Chalices or the Cybers, this can be a pretty fun deck, especially for a more casual environment, and especially if you just want to make use of older cards like Wormbait or Scapegoat that are lying around that haven't been useful in years. Next week, I'm going to be playing something spooky for Halloween, unless I've messed up the timing and this is around Halloween, in which case I'm sorry. But hopefully it'll be something spooky. Until then, good luck and have fun.